When scholars get to talking and debating, it's really easy for us to doubt and question everything. Are they the heretic or am I the heretic? But the debates and the fear-mongering don't have to be like that. It really just comes down to simple education. What are the theological lines and what aren't? Today, let's continue our conversation with Bible scholar Dr. Dan Wallace to hear his advice and tips on how he discerns between good and bad resources, what's important and what's not important, and all of his advice and tips, all so that we can better know the word and love it. Let's begin. Hey friends, welcome back to our series where we're continuing our conversation with Bible scholar Dr. Dan Wallace. If you don't know who he is, real quick, involved in Bible translation, textual criticism, seminary professor, textbook writer. He is the man, the myth, the legend. And this is actually our third video walking through his home library and picking his brain on what he uses to translate the Bible, resources he recommends. And today we're picking up where we left off, asking him about how he discerns helpful resources. We had just talked through a couple different commentaries that he referenced, some good, some meh. And I asked him, how does he discern between the good ones and the bad ones?
Dan, well, how do I know what's a trustworthy source? How do I know if they hold to inerrancy or not?
And this is what he said.
It's going to be the publishing house. That's how you'll know.
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, I think Zondervan is really a great publishing house. Do you mind if I say it?
No, not at all.
And I would say the key watershed line is not inerrancy, but infallibility.
Yeah.
There are those who hold to infallibility, which means the Bible is true in what it teaches. Those who hold to inerrancy take that a step beyond. The Bible is true in what it touches. That is, whatever it talks about, it's telling the truth within the context of how the narrative is meant to be. And so, like the Gospels.
Now, friends, did you catch that? That was like a really power-packed, wisdom-dense statement right there.
Within the context of how the narrative is meant to be.
That it really comes down to hermeneutics. Y'all know I'm a hermeneutics nerd. How we read the Bible and understand it to be communicating to us is really important for how we treat it in its infallibility or inerrancy. Y'all know I'm not a big fan of, I take everything literal in the Bible, because we know that there are metaphors. We know that there are literary elements, like when the Psalms talk about God spreading his wings over his children. It's not because he actually has wings like a mother bird. They're using the metaphor of a mother bird, right? And so this gets really tricky. Okay, then when is there literary elements? When is it telling stuff literally? How do we know? That comes down to hermeneutics. And this is where Dan went on the most power-packed excursion through talking about our hermeneutics around the Gospels. As a New Testament scholar, he's seen firsthand the importance of understanding the genre of the Gospels so that we can be faithful to the text. You're gonna love this and it's gonna blow your mind.
And so, like the Gospels are portraits of Jesus. We should not read them as strict police reports or something like that. Mm-hmm. They're not meant to be that. Every one of them is meant to be propaganda in a good sense. Mm-hmm. They're meant to persuade and give you things. So John's Gospel is all about witness. And Jesus is put on the witness stand. The Holy Spirit witnesses to his works. John the Baptist witnesses to his work. It's like a courtroom scene. Think of John's Gospel that way, and Jesus says, my words testify of me, the Spirit testifies of me. That's how we should read it. But they all have different emphases. I kind of liken it to, I'm getting a little bit off track, but say you have 4 artists who are doing a piece of art of a tall building in New York, a skyscraper, say Empire State Building. There's 3 of them down at the bottom in various places. One's doing charcoal, another's doing watercolor, another is doing oil-based paint. A 4th one is standing on top of another building that's taller than the Empire State Building, looking down, and these other guys are on, say, the south corner, and he's on the north corner. They're still describing exactly the same thing, but from radically different perspectives for the 4th one. That's John. And John is taking a look at the life of Jesus after he knows what the end is. John's Gospel is like, you ever see the Usual Suspects, or the Book of Eli, which is a fantastic movie. It's about recovering the King James Bible in the future. Have you ever heard of that, Book of Eli?
Maybe.
With Denzel Washington?
Oh, wait, yes, actually.
Yeah.
My mom told me to watch it. I don't know if I did, though.
Oh, you've got to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil it, because if you watch something like The Usual Suspects, the Book of Eli, or the old movie in the 70s, The Sting. You've heard of that?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, right. No, it won movie of the year, Academy Award. But you've got a storyline that looks like it's saying one thing, and then go, oh, wait a minute. Now I know what's going on. And then you read the story at the beginning, and you see things totally differently. That's John. What does he do at the beginning of his gospel? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He starts at the beginning before time. Matthew and Luke have a genealogy of Jesus, and Matthew, because he's king, goes back to Abraham. And Luke, he's human, takes him all the way back to Adam. Mark has no genealogy because he's a servant. Servants don't get to have genealogies. And Luke doesn't have one because he's the Son of God, so that's his genealogy right there. And so they have these perspectives, but John's is telling you the story from the perspective of, I know that Jesus is God in the flesh. And the others are slowly revealing that. That's more of an inductive approach. His is deductive. And if you understand that, you understand these scenes so much better.
They're going to love that. I might have to use that 15 times. But you were talking about different publishing houses, and you talked about Zondervan tends to be good ones. Here, I do want to get, because they're going to
Kriegel would be another good one, I think, for that.
Okay, wait, say that again.
Kriegel, Kregel, is another good publishing house for conservative works. Baker and IVP, InterVarsity Press, are also relatively conservative, but not as conservative as Zondervan and Kriegel. And I'm not saying the conservative ones are the only ones you should read, far from it. I'm simply saying it's a good place to start so you can understand how to deal with other issues. Let me give an illustration here. Donald Guthrie, who taught at the London School of Theology, he was a New Testament scholar, and he wrote a massive introduction to the New Testament. Now, what that means, an introduction to the New Testament, is telling you the background of every New Testament book, how they relate to each other, the author, the time when it was written, where it was written from, to whom it was written, what are the issues, what do we know the date of the book, and there's a lot of issues that go through the authorship. He's dealing with the hardcore questions. Although he believes that Paul wrote the 13 letters that have his name on them, as do I, he goes through the various schools. There was a Dutch school that denied Pauline authorship for all of them. There was the Tübingen school that denied Pauline authorship except for 4 of them. And now modern day liberals would say those 4 plus 3, there's 7 books that we are convinced Paul wrote. Guthrie gives the arguments on both sides for all of them. Carson and Moo do a fine introduction as well. That's just a top-notch intro. They go through these issues. Now, years ago, when I gave some arguments for the date of John's Gospel, I think at a scholarly conference, because I date it in the 60s. Most people put it in the 90s, but there's some internal evidence that's really fascinating that would put it in the 60s, I think.
Can you give us a hint? I've wanted some.
Now, there's so many reasons why the dating of John is super significant. John is like the most theological gospel as a whole, and so big picture, we typically date it as the oldest gospel. But if it is way significantly earlier, like a whole lifetime earlier, within the lifetime of people who physically met and were touched by Jesus, all the critics of the New Testament who deny the reliability of the gospel are severely humbled once again, and it's a big win for the testimony of John to just be that much more reliable. Not that we need it to have an earlier dating to trust it, but it definitely does silence a lot of the critics. Now, I wanted to share that just in case anybody was confused or lost. Not that I know everything, that's for sure. But let's get back to Dan.
Because I date it in the 60s. Most people put it in the 90s, but there's some internal evidence that's really fascinating that would put it in the 60s, I think.
Can you give us a hint? I've wanted some.
I'll give you just one issue. Okay. This is a pretty important one. In John 5:2, John writes, "Now there is by the sheep gate a pool which has 5 porticos. It's the word is. Now there is by the sheep gate a pool. That pool and the 5 porticos were destroyed in the Jewish war of 66 to 70. And I argued this 34 years ago in the Vatican's scholarly journal called Biblica. Yeah. And I got it published there in 1990. It's a paper I'd worked almost 1,000 hours on, working in 7 different languages. I looked at 300 commentaries, but I'm looking at the original sources, and the archaeological evidence was a slam dunk that the pool and the porticos were destroyed. I've been there. I've seen the ruins. But I went through 5 different ways in which scholars have dealt with it. Like, well, John was mistaken. He's far away. No, you're not going to be mistaken about that kind of a thing. That news is going to get out there pretty quickly. Or that it was a historical present when John says there is, it's a present tense used for the past. And we do this too, when we say, yesterday I did this, and then I'm doing this and this.
Yeah.
We change it to the present. It's more vivid. I went through every single historical present in the New Testament, 451 of them. Not once does the historical present use a stative verb, a verb of state, not of movement. Wow. It's never used that way. And I published it in Biblica because the people who had done the most work in John's Gospel were Roman Catholics, and I wanted to get their attention. So I try to publish in places where I'll get a reaction where people have to think about it a little bit. So it was just recently that the Lady Margaret Chair of Divinity at Cambridge University, George Van Kooten, had read that article. He followed up and he said, I think this is right. And he followed up with some more evidence. And he's been publishing on this recently, and he's solidly in agreement with me. When I was in Cambridge earlier this year, I had lunch with him, and we had a great time talking. So
I've never even heard that before.
Right. So anyway, where was I going with this?
We're talking a little bit about publishing houses, but I think we're good.
Well, I could say this too in terms of publishing. Read the Amazon reviews and find out at what school that professor teaches. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, Reformed Theological Seminary, Dallas Seminary, TEDS, I just said that. Westminster Seminary, schools like that, professors there, they're all going to be really strong evangelicals.
If you have been benefiting from learning from Dan's wisdom and you like stuff like this, he has a Scribal Fellowship, which you can join. It's kind of like my Patreon, where you pay a set amount every month to support CSNTM and their efforts to catalog parchments and fragments for the next generation and for textual criticism that we might have the most faithful Bibles. And he actually does lives, answers questions, and you'll be entered to win one of 4 Bibles that are signed by Dan. They're Net Bibles, which he oversaw the New Testament translation of. And if you missed our previous episodes picking Dan's brain and learning from his wisdom, check them out right here, or support CSNTM right here. And I'll see you guys there. Bye guys.